Extremely creepy story time on how my aunt passed away. So a little background information. About 5 years ago, my aunt had gotten pregnant. It was really weird because a few months before she got pregnant, the doctor told her that she would never be able to have kids. And her husband had been trying for years. Well, I think like 2 weeks after the baby was born, it had passed away. And I don't really know why. For some reason, my mom won't tell me. Which is weird, but anyways, after that, my aunt just felt like a lot of things weren't going the way that she wanted them to in her life. So she decided to get closer with God. Well, every Sunday night, we go to my grandparents' house for a family dinner. And while we were there, my aunt starts going on this whole rampage. She said that God's not giving her the answers that she needs, and I don't really know what she means by answers. So my grandparents kick her out because she's acting like a psycho. Well, the same night at 3 a.m. in the morning, we hear a knocking on the door. And lo and behold, it's my aunt. So my mom lets her in because she feels bad and feels like she's the only one that will actually listen to my aunt. So she makes everybody sit at the kitchen table. And she pulls out a Ouija board from her bag, like for part 2. Creepy story time about how my aunt passed away, part 2. So like I said, she makes us all sit down at the kitchen table and she pulls out a Ouija board. She was like, I found out how I can get some answers. I just feel like I need you guys around me for positive energy. And my family is very, very religious. Like, we don't fuck with that shit. But because my mom felt bad for her, she let her use it in our house. But my mom didn't want my sisters and I around that, so she just sent us to bed. Well, the next morning, I wake up and I ask my mom what happened with the Ouija board situation. My mom just said that it was really scary, because before she thought it was like a load of bullshit, and she said that her and my dad didn't touch the Ouija board, because like I said, they were very religious and did not mess with that stuff. But apparently, it said for her not to buy a house with the numbers 2815. Well, 2 years later, my aunt got remarried, and her husband ended up having 2 kids. So they bought a new house, and no, it didn't have the numbers on it. One of their kids accidentally shattered the glass door, so they went and got a new one, and it came with those exact numbers on it. 2 days later, the house burnt down and nobody survived. Storytime about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know it. So a little background information. When I was 15, my house burnt down, and I went into a little bit of a depression. So after losing everything, my 6 siblings and I had to move into a 3-bedroom place with my grandparents. And a month or so later, I was looking for friends. Someone to talk to or pretty much anything that would just make me feel better. Well, this guy messaged me, and he said, "You're pretty as shit." And I'm 15, so a bitch was excited. Well, 2 weeks later, I asked my mom if I could go over my friend Samantha's. And of course, she said yes. Because I had stayed with Samantha a lot during this time. Also because there was barely room for any of us in this 3-bedroom house. So a little background information on my parents. My mom had been a police officer for 12 years. Sadly, she had to retire because of a neck surgery. My ex-stepdad was and still is a police officer today. Anyway, so my mom asked for pictures whenever I went over Samantha's to make sure I was really there. Like for part 2. Storytime about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know. So like I said, my mom used to ask for pictures to make sure that I was really at Samantha's house. Well, Samantha lived about 10 minutes away from the guy that I was talking to. Every time that I went to her house, I would leave at about 8 p.m. and go over to his house. And he was 26 years old. And obviously I knew my parents would freak the fuck out if they found out. And we had planned to keep this a secret until I turned 18. So that way my parents couldn't tell me that I wasn't allowed to be with him. To flash forward to about 3 days before I turned 18, my mom comes into my work. She walks up to me, shows me a picture of him, and says, "Who the hell is this?" So of course I say I have no idea who the hell she's talking about. She said okay and then left. Well, as soon as I got home, her and my dad were sitting in the living room, waiting for me to explain who that man was. So I told them everything. They decided not to take legal action, but my mom explained to me that I was so young and he took advantage of me and stuff like that, so I never saw him again. Storytime about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you. Part 2 about why I beat up my best friend. So like I said, I learned how to do my hair and makeup, and she went on vacation for like a month straight. Well, when she came home, she threw another party, and she was like, don't worry, after I'm done getting ready, I'll do your makeup and do your hair. And I was like, no, it's fine, I got it. She literally looks at me and she goes, are you sure? You don't really know how to do that. Like, it'll probably look really bad. And I'm like, why the fuck would you say that? She goes, no, like, I don't mean it to be rude. It's just that, like, I want you to look good in front of the boys and stuff like that. Like, sis tried to talk me into getting a shower for a full, like, 20 minutes. So after that, the whole night, she's literally being a pick-me girl. She's making all these comments about me in front of the boys. And I just keep brushing them off until her next party. We got ready and I put on these expensive shoes that I had just bought. And she goes, wow, you just like really like to copy my style, don't you? So she starts making comments that whole night about how my family's poor and stuff like that. And she threw up all over my shoes. So I dumped the trash can that everybody had threw up in that night on her, punched her in the face. But like 2 months later, she came to my house and apologized.